At the bustling Chicago O'Hare International Airport, a black federal agent just wanted to board her flight home after 12 grueling days of undercover work. But a ticket agent's racial prejudice sparked a disaster. She tore up the agent's federal ID and hurled insults, oblivious to the fact that she was destroying her own career. What unfolded next left her with nothing but bitter regret. Before we dive into this riveting story, drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing your thoughts. Dr. Lauren Mitchell felt an exhaustion that seeped into her bones, the kind that only comes after a high-stakes, high-pressure operation. For the past 12 days, she'd been living out of sterile hotel rooms in Seattle, leading a covert audit of airport security protocols. The project, codenamed Operation Sky Shield, was her creation, designed to stress test the nation's aviation security system from within. It was relentless, thankless work, meticulous observation, feigned ignorance, and endless late-night reports. Now, all that stood between her and her cozy Brooklyn apartment was a 2-hour flight to New York City. Lauren had deliberately dressed down for the journey home: faded blue jeans, a worn NYU hoodie, and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a tight, practical ponytail. After a week of playing roles, confused tourist, demanding executive, anxious first-time flyer, she just wanted to blend in. Her first-class ticket, a small but necessary perk after the mission's intensity, promised a wider seat, a bit of quiet, and the mental space to decompress. O'Hare was a symphony of controlled chaos. The clatter of rolling suitcases, the chime of boarding announcements, and the murmur of countless conversations blended into a familiar hum. Lauren navigated the sea of travelers like a seasoned pro, her backpack slung over one shoulder, containing only a laptop, a dog-eared mystery novel, and a thick file of preliminary findings that would soon shake the aviation world. She arrived at Gate C-15, where Apex Airlines Flight 422 to JFK was set to board in 20 minutes. The gate area was a mosaic of humanity, a family wrangling 2 overexcited kids, a group of tech entrepreneurs in matching navy blazers, an elderly couple sharing a bag of almonds. Then there was the ticket agent. Her name tag read Susan Reynolds in crisp corporate font. Susan, in her late 40s, had a helmet of tightly curled auburn hair and a thin, perpetually downturned mouth that radiated disapproval. She moved with exaggerated self-importance, her fingers pounding the keyboard with unnecessary force, her voice sharp and condescending as she answered a passenger's question. Lauren watched her for a moment, her investigator's instincts never fully dormant. Susan's interactions were revealing. A smiling white family with a question about their seats received warm smiles and sweetie for their kids, while a soft-spoken Latino grandfather asking about delays was met with a curt, "It'll board when it boards. Listen for the announcement." Lauren felt a familiar pang. It was a textbook case of what she called authority bias, when someone in a uniform, any uniform, uses their sliver of power to create a hierarchy based on personal prejudice. It was one of many human factors that could undermine security, a tiny crack in the system waiting to be exploited. Finally, the pre-boarding call for first-class passengers echoed. "We now invite first-class passengers to board. Please have your boarding pass and a valid government-issued ID ready for inspection." Lauren joined the short line. When her turn came, she stepped forward, scanned her e-ticket on the reader, and presented her federal ID card. Susan glanced at the ticket, then at Lauren, her eyes traveling from the hoodie to the sneakers and back to Lauren's face. The warm smile she'd given the family vanished, replaced by a cold, assessing stare. "A federal ID for a domestic flight?" Susan asked, her tone dripping with suspicion. "It's my primary government-issued ID. It's valid," Lauren replied, her voice calm and even. She'd used it all week without issue. It was standard practice. Susan flipped through the dark blue booklet dismissively, holding it up to the light, squinting at the photo. "This picture doesn't look much like you," she said, her voice laced with accusation. "The photo's 5 years old, but it's unmistakably me," Lauren said, keeping her tone light. "My face hasn't changed that much." Susan let out a short, derisive laugh. "Funny, you look younger here, more polished." She tapped a manicured nail on the data page. "Lauren Mitchell, doctor of what? Psychology? Social work?" The microaggressions stacked up, each one a deliberate jab. Lauren recognized the pattern instantly. She'd seen it countless times, not just in her work, but in her life. The questioning of credentials, the insinuation of dishonesty, the challenge to her presence in a space. Susan believed she didn't belong. "My doctorate is in aviation security systems engineering," Lauren stated, her voice losing its lightness, replaced with professional clarity. "Is there a problem with the document, or may I board?" The directness seemed to provoke Susan, her lips thinning into a razor-sharp line. "There's a problem with me believing this is legitimate," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for those behind Lauren to hear. "First class, brand new federal ID. It doesn't add up." The ID wasn't new. Its pristine condition was due to Lauren's meticulous care for her federal documents. The accusation hung heavy, ugly. The passengers behind her shifted uncomfortably. "I assure you it's legitimate," Lauren said, her patience wearing thin. "It was issued by the Department of Homeland Security. You can verify it with your system. I'd like to take my seat." Susan leaned in, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Or maybe you bought it. People like you can be resourceful. I've seen it all. Fake IDs, fake credit cards, fake everything." She looked Lauren up and down again. Lauren's blood ran cold. The insult was no longer veiled. It was a blatant racist attack, delivered under the fluorescent lights of a busy airport gate, cloaked in corporate authority. She knew she had to de-escalate, following the protocols she'd authored, but she was human, and the exhaustion of her mission, coupled with the sheer audacity of the assault, frayed her composure. "Ma'am," Lauren said, her voice hard as steel, "you're making serious, unfounded accusations. Scan the document, verify it, or call your supervisor. But you will not stand here and slander me." Susan seemed to relish the confrontation, exactly what she wanted. She held the ID between her thumb and forefinger, like it was contaminated. "Oh, I'll do more than that," she hissed, her eyes gleaming with vindictive fire. "I'm resolving this now." With a sharp twist of her wrist, she tore the ID in two. The sound, a soft, piercing rip, was shockingly loud in the quiet gate area. The two halves of the blue booklet, bearing Lauren's photo and the national seal, fluttered to the counter with quiet finality. For a moment, silence reigned. Passengers stared, jaws slack. Susan stood, chest puffed out, triumphant, as if she'd vanquished a great evil. Lauren looked at the torn ID, the document that had carried her through global missions, a symbol of her authority, now destroyed. In that moment, the weary traveler in jeans ceased to exist. In her place stood Dr. Lauren Mitchell, federal investigator, architect of Operation Sky Shield. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a crystalline, ice-cold focus. Susan had no idea what she'd just done. She thought she'd won a petty battle against someone she deemed unworthy. She couldn't have been more wrong. She'd started a war. The silence following the rip was profound, a vacuum where the airport's hum had been. Every eye at gate C-15 locked onto the scene. Susan basked in the attention, her arms crossed, a smug smirk etched on her face. In her mind, she'd exposed a fraud, protected her airline's integrity. She was the hero of her own small, ugly story. Lauren didn't look at Susan. She didn't shout or cry. Slowly, she raised her eyes, locking onto Susan's victorious stare. Susan expected hysteria, a tirade, tears, a satisfying meltdown. What she got was far more unnerving, absolute stillness. "You just destroyed a United States federal document," Lauren said, her voice quiet, almost conversational, yet unnaturally clear, cutting through the silence. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of an assessor, a judge. "That's a federal offense, Title 18, Section 1543 of the U.S. Code. Mutilation or alteration of federal documents, punishable by up to 25 years in prison." Susan's smirk faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She'd expected accusations of racism, not citations of federal law. "It was fake," she stammered, her bravado cracking. "I was within my authority as an agent of this airline to—" "You weren't," Lauren cut her off, her voice steady but edged with undeniable authority. "You had a protocol, one I assume you were trained on. You're to use the document scanner and UV system to verify its features. If doubts remain, you contact a supervisor and airport security. Nowhere in that protocol are you, a private citizen employed by a corporation, permitted to unilaterally destroy federal property. You didn't follow procedure. Why?" The question hung in the air, not angry, but forensic. A young man nearby edged closer. Phone recording. I used my discretion," Susan said, her voice turning desperate. "The safety of this flight is my responsibility." "Your responsibility is to follow the law and your company's regulations," Lauren countered, stepping deliberately away from the counter, creating a space of command. She reached into her backpack, movements unhurried, precise. Susan flinched as if expecting a weapon. Instead, Lauren pulled out her phone. She didn't dial 911. She tapped a single contact on her favorites list. As the phone rang, her voice addressed the crowd as much as Susan. The call connected, and Lauren's demeanor shifted to brisk professionalism. "Director Hargrove, this is Mitchell. Apologies for the direct call. I'm at O'Hare, Gate C-15, invoking a code black under Operation Sky Shield. Active security breach and willful destruction of federal property by an Apex Airlines employee. I need TSA and FBI liaison teams on site immediately. Also, get me a direct line to Apex Airlines' legal department. Inform them they're about to breach their operating certificate." The mention of Operation Sky Shield and FBI sent shockwaves through the crowd. The tech entrepreneurs exchanged wide-eyed glances. Susan's face drained of color, her jaw slackening in disbelief. "No, you're lying," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're nobody." Lauren ended the call, meeting Susan's gaze with unwavering calm. The mask of the weary traveler was gone, burned away by righteous purpose. Now she was every inch the federal officer. "My name," she said, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority, "is Lauren Mitchell. I am Senior Field Inspector for the Transportation Security Administration's National Security and Incident Response Office. The operation I've been leading for the past 12 days is a national audit of your airline's compliance with federal security mandates. Your actions here, your profiling, disregard for protocol, and destruction of my credentials have not merely inconvenienced a passenger. You've provided a glaring, documented example of systemic failure we're here to root out." She let the words sink in. "So tell me, Susan, why didn't you follow procedure? Inadequate training or something else?" Susan stood speechless, her mind whirling with denial and panic. The woman she dismissed as a fraud was an undercover federal agent. The world had flipped, and she had no one to blame but herself. Just then, a man in a slightly ill-fitting suit rushed toward the gate. His name tag read, "James Carter, Station Supervisor." "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Susan, What did you do? We've got a flight to board." Susan turned to him, eyes wide with desperation. "James, this woman tried to board with a fake federal ID. It was a cheap forgery. I confiscated it." She gestured vaguely toward the torn ID on the counter, omitting that she'd ripped it apart. James looked from Susan's panicked face to Lauren's unsettlingly calm expression. His instinct was to back his employee, smooth things over, and get the flight moving. Delays cost money. "Ma'am," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "I'm sure we can sort this out if there's an issue with your ID." "Your time to sort this out has passed, Mr. Carter," Lauren cut in, her eyes flicking to his name tag. "Your employee has committed a federal offense. Your airline is now under active investigation by the TSA. Immediately, Flight 422 will not be departing. This gate is now a federal investigation scene. Nothing," her eyes swept over the counter, "is to be touched." Right on cue, 2 uniformed TSA officers appeared at the edge of the gate area, their faces serious. Behind them, 2 sharply dressed individuals moved with the unmistakable confidence of federal agents. The hum of the airport returned, now layered with the crackle of police radios and the murmurs of a gathering crowd. Susan looked at the approaching officers, the torn ID, Lauren's unyielding face. The reality crashed down like a tidal wave of pure fear. The smugness, the power, the petty thrill, all evaporated, replaced by primal terror. She hadn't just made a mistake. She'd ended her career. She'd destroyed her life. And it all happened in under 5 minutes, starting with a sneer, ending with the soft rip of her own ruin. The arrival of law enforcement flipped a switch at Gate C-15. The spectacle became a formal proceeding. The TSA officers established a perimeter, while the 2 plainclothes agents from the FBI liaison office approached Lauren directly, bypassing everyone else. One was a tall man with a calm demeanor, the other a shorter woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mitchell?" the man asked respectfully. "Agent Alvarez, this is Agent Wong. We got the call from Director Hargrove. What's the situation?" Before Lauren could respond, James stepped forward, his face a mask of flustered indignation. "Hold on. Who's in charge here? This is Apex Airlines property. My gate. This woman," he gestured toward Lauren, voice rising, "is making threats and disrupting our operation." Agent Wong turned to him slowly, unimpressed. "Sir," she said flatly, "the moment a federal crime is committed on airport property, jurisdiction shifts. We are now in charge. Please step back and do not interfere." James's mouth opened and closed in stunned silence. His corporate rulebook was being shredded before his eyes. His authority, so powerful within the airport, meant nothing now. He was a middle manager caught in a riptide of federal power. Lauren addressed the agents, fully professional. "Agent Alvarez, Agent Wong, thank you for the swift response. The subject," she nodded toward Susan, now visibly trembling, "is an Apex Airlines ticket agent. She refused to accept my valid federal ID for a domestic flight. After a series of unprofessional and biased remarks, she deliberately destroyed the document." She pointed to the torn halves on the counter. "That's the evidence. I need it collected and preserved. The subject's name is Susan Reynolds. The station supervisor is James Carter." Agent Alvarez nodded, pulling on nitrile gloves. He carefully lifted the ID halves with tweezers and sealed them in an evidence bag. That simple act sealed Susan's fate more than any words could. It wasn't a dispute anymore. It was evidence in a federal case. "The gate's security cameras will have captured the entire interaction," Lauren continued, her mind a finely tuned machine. "I need that footage pulled immediately from all angles, before anyone has a chance to accidentally wipe it. I also want employee logs for the last 48 hours and Apex Airlines' official passenger ID verification protocol." "Consider it done," Agent Wong replied, speaking quietly into her wrist-mounted comms. Susan watched in horror as her reality unraveled. The woman she'd belittled was now commanding federal agents with absolute authority. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been violently inverted. "James," Susan whimpered, turning to her supervisor, her last desperate hope. "Do something. Tell them I was just doing my job. I thought it was fake. I was protecting the flight." James looked at her, then at the stone-faced agents, then at Lauren. His self-preservation instincts kicked in, and the need to save himself won by a landslide. The transition from the bustling gate to a sterile airport interview room was swift and disorienting for Susan. One moment, she was surrounded by the familiar sounds of her workplace. The next, she sat on a hard plastic chair in a beige, windowless room. The only furniture was a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. Agent Wong sat opposite, a file and pen her only props. Agent Alvarez stood by the door. The air was thick with the scent of industrial disinfectant and stale regret. Susan's mind raced in panicked circles. This had to be a misunderstanding, a colossal overreaction. She was a good employee, 22 years with Apex Airlines, from check-in clerk to lead ticket agent. She had seniority. James always had her back. This couldn't be happening. "I want to call my husband," she said weakly, "and I want to speak to James." "You'll have an opportunity to make a phone call," Agent Wong replied neutrally, clicking her pen. "Mr. Carter is currently in another room providing his own statement. For now, I have a few preliminary questions." She opened the file. Inside was a single sheet with Susan's employee photo clipped to the top. Full legal name, Susan R. Reynolds? "Yes," Susan whispered. "And you've been the lead ticket agent at this gate for 7 years?" "Yes." "In your 2 decades with Apex Airlines, how many times have you received training on passenger identification verification protocols, known as PIV?" "I don't know exactly. We have yearly refreshers." "And what does that protocol instruct if you suspect a passenger's identification is fraudulent?" Susan's throat was dry. "We're supposed to use the verification equipment, the UV scanner. If doubts remain, we call a supervisor or airport security." "And did you use the verification equipment on Dr. Mitchell's ID?" "No," Susan admitted. "The scanner was integrated into her counter. It would have taken 5 seconds. And why not? Because I had a feeling it looked off. The way she was dressed, her attitude, it was all wrong. I was being proactive about security." Agent Wong's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "So, you replaced a federally mandated security protocol with a feeling. A feeling based on what you described to your supervisor as this passenger being dressed like that. Let's move on to the document itself. You stated you believed it to be a cheap forgery. What specific elements of the ID led you to that conclusion? Was the microprinting flawed? The holographic seal incorrect? Did the binding fail federal standards?" Susan stared blankly. She didn't know any of that. She'd glanced at the photo and name and made a snap judgment. 22 years on the job, and she'd never studied ID security features. She just knew. "It looked fake," she mumbled, the weakness of her excuse echoing in the small room. "To be clear," Agent Wong summarized, her voice cutting through Susan's panic. "With no technical basis, you ignored your training, profiled a passenger based on appearance and race, and when questioned, committed a federal crime by destroying the very document you were tasked to inspect. Is that an accurate summary of events?" The words, laid out so plainly, were devastating. Susan felt a wave of nausea. "I want a lawyer," she whispered. "A wise decision," Agent Wong replied, closing the file. "You'll be formally processed by airport police. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be in touch regarding federal charges." As Agent Alvarez escorted a stunned, sobbing Susan from the room, Lauren was in the station supervisor's cluttered office, reviewing complaint files. The quiet architect of Apex Airlines' impending reckoning. She sat comfortably in James Carter's chair behind a desk, littered with coffee-stained papers and framed awards for operational excellence. James perched nervously on the edge of a guest chair, the power reversal absolute. Agent Alvarez had handed Lauren the initial printouts she'd requested. Synchronized security footage from the gate, loaded onto a tablet, and a thin folder labeled Susan Reynolds. Complaint history. "Mr. Carter," Lauren began, her voice calm and measured. "I've reviewed your employee's file. In the past 5 years, there have been 14 formal complaints against Ms. Reynolds. 9 from passengers of color, 4 from passengers with disabilities, and 1 from a passenger of South Asian descent." James squirmed. "We get complaints all the time. It's part of customer service. People get upset when they miss flights." "I'm not talking about missed flights," Lauren said, her eyes narrowing. "I'm talking about a complaint from Mr. Javier Morales, who reported that Ms. Reynolds loudly asked if he spoke English when he presented a valid California driver's license. I'm talking about a complaint from Priya Patel, who alleges Ms. Reynolds lost her and her 2 children's seat assignments after she requested a vegetarian meal. I'm talking about a complaint from a retired Marine, a double amputee, who claims Ms. Reynolds told him he was holding up the line and should have requested wheelchair assistance, despite walking capably with prosthetics." She slid the folder across the desk. "And on every single one of these, Mr. Carter, I see your signature. Action taken. Counseled employee. Action taken. Verbal warning. Action taken. Case closed." "Tell me, what exactly did that counseling entail?" James began to sweat profusely. I talked to Susan, told her to be more careful with her words, that she had to treat everyone with respect. And yet the pattern continued. It escalated, Lauren stated, from verbal insults to deliberate obstruction, and today it culminated in a criminal act. What you call counseling, Mr. Carter, the TSA calls gross negligence. You weren't managing an employee. You were enabling a known liability. You cultivated a culture at this gate where prejudice was permissible as long as flights left on time. You are just as culpable as she is. James's already pale face turned ashen. "That's not true. I'm a good manager." "A good manager?" Lauren leaned forward, her voice sharpening. "A good manager doesn't have an employee who feels empowered to rip a passenger's federal ID in half in front of 50 witnesses. A good manager identifies dangerous patterns and removes the threat. You didn't, you buried it, and now it's going to bury you." She stood. "Your airline's operating license depends on compliance with federal law and TSA security directives. Those directives explicitly prohibit discriminatory practices because they create volatile, unpredictable security risks. You and your star employee have provided us with a textbook case study. The TSA is launching a full top-to-bottom audit of this entire O'Hare hub, effective immediately. Every log, every personnel file, every procedure will be scrutinized. We're putting your operation under a microscope, Mr. Carter, and I suspect we'll find a lot more than just one rogue ticket agent." James stared at her, his world collapsing. The awards on his wall mocked him. His career, built on cutting corners and looking the other way, was about to be dismantled. Lauren paused at the door, hand on the knob. She turned back. "Oh, and Mr. Carter," her voice steady but cutting. "I've reviewed the gate footage, the part where your employee calls me arrogant for asking her to do her job. Expect a subpoena. You'll testify to that under oath. I suggest you start thinking carefully about what your definition of counseling really means." She walked out, leaving him alone in the cluttered office, the only sound the frantic thudding of his own heart. The unraveling had begun, and it would be faster, uglier and far more painful than James Carter ever imagined. Lauren's promise to put Apex Airlines' O'Hare hub under a microscope wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The investigation radiated outward from Susan Reynolds. Her work computer was cloned. Her email server seized. Investigators unearthed a trove of emails between her and James Carter, a sordid history of buried complaints and winking reassurances. "Don't worry about that guy," one email read. "I handled it. Just keep it less obvious next time." LOL. The LOL was a nail in James's coffin, but Susan was only the loose thread. As Lauren's team pulled, the entire fabric of the O'Hare hub unraveled. Audits of employee files, which James had ineptly shielded, revealed Susan's case wasn't an outlier, just the most egregious. They discovered other employees with disturbing patterns. A baggage supervisor who consistently misrouted luggage belonging to passengers with African or Middle Eastern names. A ticketing agent with a statistically impossible record of assigning minority families to middle seats, even on nearly empty flights. These were small acts of degradation, paper cuts of prejudice, dismissed or ignored by management, obsessed with on-time departures. "This isn't a bad apple problem," Lauren declared during a team briefing, standing before a whiteboard covered in names and flowcharts. "It's a rotten orchard." The culture here, fostered by Carter and his predecessors, is one of willful blindness. Compliance is optional. Profit and speed are king. Everything else, security, human dignity, is secondary. The most damning discovery came from the maintenance logs. A data analyst, cross-referencing parts inventory with flight records, uncovered small but undeniable patterns. Apex Airlines' O'Hare hub had been cutting corners, extending the service life of non-critical parts beyond manufacturer recommendations, pencil-whipping inspections, signing off on checks that were never performed. They found the case of Flight 819 3 months prior, a Phoenix route forced to make an emergency landing in Denver due to a cabin pressure sensor failure. The official report, signed by James Carter, blamed an unforeseeable malfunction. The TSA audit revealed the truth. The sensor was operating well beyond its legal lifespan, on its third unauthorized extension. The inspection report for its last check had been signed by a mechanic who, according to payroll records, was on vacation in Florida that day. James Carter hadn't just ignored prejudice. He'd actively covered up dangerous violations that endangered lives. The torn ID wasn't the main crime anymore. It was the key that unlocked a vault of systemic corruption. Lauren sat down with Captain Elena Torres, the pilot of the canceled Flight 422. Torres and her crew were grounded pending the investigation. She was angry, embarrassed, and terrified for her career. "Captain," Lauren began, professional but not unkind. "Your record is exemplary. 25 years spotless. Which is why I find it hard to believe you were completely unaware of this gate's lax culture." Torres shifted in her seat. "My job's in the cockpit, Mitchell. I fly the plane. I rely on ground crew and gate management to do their jobs properly. I have to trust them." "Trust isn't control," Lauren countered. "It's a variable. During pre-departure checks, did you ever notice anything that gave you pause? Maintenance sign-offs that seemed rushed? Crew complaints about short staffing?" Torres hesitated. Her loyalty was to her crew and airline, but her ultimate duty was to passenger safety, and Lauren seemed to know the answers already. "There have been whispers," she admitted reluctantly. "Talk of management pressuring faster turnarounds, discouraging delays for minor write-ups. We're told to use discretion, but I never saw anything that made me think safety was compromised." "And Susan Reynolds?" Lauren pressed. "What were the whispers about her?" Torres sighed heavily. "Everyone knew about Susan. We called her the gatekeeper. She had favorites. If you were on her good side, boarding was smooth. If not, it wasn't. We avoided her, easier than fighting with her and dragging James into it. So you were aware of her behavior, Lauren concluded. You and others made a conscious choice to ignore it for the sake of convenience. That, Captain, is called complicity. It's the soil where people like Susan and James thrive. The words hit Torres like a blow. She prided herself on integrity, but Lauren was showing her that integrity wasn't passive. It required action, and she, like many others, had failed to act. The investigation wasn't about a single incident anymore. It was about the hidden rot that grows when profit trumps people, when accountability is sacrificed for convenience and prejudice goes unchecked, creating an environment where larger crimes fester. Lauren surveyed the mountain of evidence, falsified logs, complaint histories, damning emails. It all started with one woman's ugly assumption about another woman's place in the world. It was a brutal reminder of a truth Lauren had built her career on. In aviation, bigotry isn't just a social evil. It's a direct, dangerous threat to security. The consequences came not as one thunderclap, but as a series of devastating, targeted strikes. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Susan Reynolds. Karma was swift and absolute. Fired within an hour of the story breaking, arrested the next day, footage of her being led from her suburban Chicago home in handcuffs, face crumpled in disbelief, became the scandal's defining image. She was charged with destruction of federal property. Civil rights violations were later added. Her feeling about Lauren Mitchell would cost her years of her life. Her defense crumbled when James Carter, desperate for leniency, agreed to testify against her, detailing his years of covering for her with meaningless counseling. James's fate was arguably worse. Fired and criminally charged, not just for the ID incident, but for falsifying safety records. The TSA made an example of him, ensuring he'd never work in aviation again. His name became synonymous with managerial negligence. Facing decades in prison for endangering lives, he took a plea deal, multiple years in federal prison. The real karma hit Apex Airlines. The TSA levied one of the largest fines in its history, a sum so staggering it shocked Wall Street analysts. But the fine wasn't purely punitive, it was prescriptive. A significant portion was earmarked for a complete overhaul of Apex's training, compliance, and hiring practices, overseen by a court-appointed federal monitor for 5 years. Lauren helped write the terms. The airline's stock plummeted, passengers boycotted, and the PR nightmare was relentless. The story of the racist ticket agent who tore up a federal ID became a national cautionary tale. Apex Airlines, once known for affordable flights, was now synonymous with prejudice and corruption. They were forced into a humiliating apology tour, their CEO grimacing through national TV appearances. 6 months later, Lauren Mitchell stood at a podium on Capitol Hill, no longer in undercover jeans, but a sharply tailored navy suit. Her posture was confident, her voice strong as it echoed through the chamber. A large screen displayed a high-resolution image of her torn ID, now a symbol of a broken system. What happened at O'Hare wasn't the result of one bad employee, Lauren told the committee. It was the inevitable product of a corporate culture that tolerated prejudice, prioritized speed over safety, and ignored the basic truth. Security is compromised the moment we start making assumptions based on race, religion, or appearance. An aide approached her afterward, voice thick with emotion. "Mitchell, thank you for not backing down, for what you did." Lauren offered a small, sincere smile. She thought of the humiliation at the gate, the cold fury that had fueled her, the long, exhausting months that followed. "I was just doing my job," she replied. As she stepped into the bright New York sunlight, she felt a profound, weary satisfaction. The karma that struck Susan, James, and Apex Airlines wasn't mystical. It was methodical, procedural, the powerful, inevitable result of a system finally forced to hold the corrupt accountable. It was the hard-earned outcome of one woman who refused to be invisible and, in doing so, ensured the ugly rot she exposed would finally be brought into the light. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.